The first knock was so soft that Daniel almost convinced himself he had imagined it. A delicate little tap, like a small hand too timid to commit to the sound it wanted to make. He sat there on the couch in his dimly lit living room, half listening to the low hum of the old AC unit and half watching the blue flicker of the late-night news replay. The clock on the wall read 2:14 a.m., a time when no one should be awake, let alone knocking. The second knock came harder, not aggressive, just insistent. A steady, rhythmic tapping that cut clean through the silence of the house and landed like cold fingertips against Daniel's spine. He muted the TV and held his breath, thinking maybe it was a neighbor, maybe someone's car had broken down, maybe anything but the stories he had heard around his small Texas town. Stories he told himself were nothing more than campfire nonsense meant to scare city newcomers. When the third knock came, he finally stood. The porch light clicked on automatically, casting a pale cone of yellow across the front step. What he saw through the frosted glass froze him in place. Two small silhouettes, children, one standing slightly ahead of the other, both perfectly still, too still, as if they weren't breathing. A girl in a dingy white dress and a boy in an oversized hoodie a few steps behind her. Daniel's heart thudded uneasily as he approached the door, instinct telling him something was wrong, logic telling him children wandering around at this hour needed help. He unlocked the deadbolt, but kept the chain in place, opening the door only enough to see them clearly. The girl lifted her face first. Her skin was chalky, the shade of something that hadn't seen sunlight in a long time. Her hair hung in thick, tangled strands, like it had been wet earlier and dried in the desert air. And her eyes, God, her eyes were not eyes at all. They were pits. Bottomless voids of liquid blackness, swallowing the porch light without reflecting even a flicker. The boy behind her slowly tilted his head, and Daniel saw his eyes were the same. A smooth, glassy black that seemed to pull at the edges of reality like gravity. "May we come in?" the girl asked. Her voice was soft but wrong, shaped like a child's voice but lacking the warmth of one. A monotone calm that carried no emotion, no fear, no exhaustion, just intention. Daniel's throat tightened. "Where are your parents?" he managed. "We need to come inside," the girl said, ignoring the question. She didn't fidget, she didn't blink. She simply stood there with that unnatural stillness, as if she were carved from wax. "Please, it's very cold." Daniel felt heat rising along his neck despite the AC running. Something about the word "please" hit him like a static spark. His instinct screamed at him, "Do not open this door. Do not enchain it. Do not let them in." But the part of him raised on Southern manners warred with that primal fear. They were kids. Kids shouldn't be out alone in the middle of the night. And yet, every part of his body felt wrong in their presence. The girl took a slow step forward, her bare feet making no sound on the concrete. The boy behind her lifted his chin just a fraction. The air felt heavier, like it thickened between them, as if something invisible was pushing against the doorway from their side. Daniel steadied his shaking voice. "I can call someone to help you. The police or..." "No." The word dropped like lead. Her tone didn't change. It was still quiet, still polite, but the command beneath it pulsed like something alive. Behind Daniel, every light in the house flickered once. The first time, the boy smiled. Not a child's smile. Something stretched too wide, too slow, too knowing. Daniel slammed the door shut, and from the other side the girl whispered, barely audible through the wood, "We know you're alone." Daniel staggered backward from the door, breath shaking, pulse hammering like he'd sprinted a mile. His hands trembled so violently he could barely re-engage the deadbolt. He pressed both palms flat against the wood, eyes wide, listening, waiting for another knock, another whisper, another unnatural voice, but nothing came. Only silence, a suffocating silence thick enough to feel. The house felt colder now. The AC unit clicked, hummed, and then stuttered into an uneven whine as though something outside was interfering with the power. Daniel swallowed hard, trying to steady himself. "They're just kids," he whispered, but even saying that out loud sounded stupid. Those weren't kids. Those weren't anything human. No child had eyes like that. No child spoke with that eerie calmness, like every word had been memorized but not understood. He crept to the window beside the door, but stopped just short of pulling the blinds open. His hand hovered there, knowing he shouldn't look, knowing every horror story started exactly like this, with someone lifting a curtain they shouldn't. He drew in a slow breath and peeked through the narrow gap between the slats. They were still there, standing exactly where they had been. No movement, no shifting. Not even the slight sway a tired child makes when standing too long. They were statues, wax figures left under the porch light. The girl stared straight at the door, her face too calm, her expression too empty. The boy faced the street, head tilted at an unnatural angle, as if listening to something far away. But the worst part? The part that made Daniel's blood run cold. They didn't cast shadows. The porch light shone directly above them, bright enough to carve sharp shadows under the columns, the railing, even the potted plant near the steps. But not them. The space beneath their feet was simply wrong. A faint ripple, a distortion in the air, like heat rising from asphalt, but at night in the cold, beneath a bright light, it made no sense. Daniel's stomach twisted. He dropped the blinds instantly. His phone buzzed. Daniel jumped, nearly dropping it. He glanced at the screen. Unknown number. He hesitated. It buzzed again. And again. 3 times, in rapid succession. A cold wave washed over him. "No," he whispered. "How?" The buzzing stopped. A second later, the house lights flickered once more. The hallway light dimmed until it was barely glowing. The kitchen light blinked and died entirely. Only the living room lamp remained steady, but its bulb hummed so loudly it sounded ready to burst. Daniel stepped back. Then came the tapping. Not at the door, not at the window, but on the glass of the back patio door. A slow, deliberate tap, tap, tap. Daniel froze. The children were still on the porch, he knew that. But something else was now behind his house. Something circling. Something that knew he was trapped. He inched forward towards the back door, heart pounding so hard he thought the knocking would drown it out. He reached the kitchen entryway and peeked around the corner. Nothing. But the tapping grew faster. Tap, tap, tap. He forced himself forward, each step feeling like a mistake. He reached the sliding glass door and stared out into the dark expanse of his backyard. The motion sensor lights should have clicked on, but they didn't. Only darkness greeted him. Daniel leaned closer to the glass, breath trembling. A faint reflection caught his eye. Behind him. Daniel spun around so fast he stumbled. Standing in the hallway, half lit by the dying bulb overhead, was the girl. The same girl from the porch. Same dress, same tangled hair, same empty black eyes. Except her lips curved into the slightest, smallest smile. "Why won't you let us in?" she whispered. Daniel's scream caught in his throat, and the house lights went out. Darkness swallowed the house so completely that Daniel could no longer tell where the walls were. For a moment, he couldn't move, couldn't even breathe. The only sound was his own heartbeat thudding against the inside of his skull. The girl was gone, or at least, she wasn't where he'd seen her last. But that meant nothing. Nothing good. Daniel fumbled along the wall for the light switch, fingers shaking so badly he kept missing it. When he finally found it and flipped it up, nothing happened. Not even the weak flicker the old wiring sometimes made during storms. The power was gone. Not neighborhood gone, not grid gone, inside the house gone. Something was cutting it from within. Daniel's breath quickened as he backed toward the kitchen counter. He knew he had a flashlight somewhere, probably in the junk drawer beside the fridge. He yanked the drawer open, metal rattling loudly in the silence, making him wince. His fingers brushed over batteries, rubber bands, loose screws, menus, then finally, the flashlight. He clicked it on. A thin beam sliced through the dark. Relief washed over him, until he realized something was wrong with the light. The beam flickered as if something unseen kept drifting through it, something invisible. Like the darkness itself wasn't just lack of light, but a thing, a presence. He swept the beam toward the hallway. Empty. He checked the living room. Still empty. He checked behind him. Nothing. But then, from the front door, he heard the boy's voice. But the boy still stood outside. He knew he did. Knew he hadn't opened the door. And yet the voice came from inside. Let us in. It sounded wrong. Too calm, too familiar, like the boy wasn't speaking so much as imitating the shape of the words. Daniel stepped backward, gripping the flashlight so tightly it dug into his palm. The house felt smaller by the second. Walls he'd known for years now seemed to lean in. Floors creaked under weight that wasn't his. Air thickened as if holding its breath. Then the girl's voice drifted from somewhere behind him, whisper soft, almost a song. Let us in. Daniel. His pulse spiked. He had never told them his name. He spun, sweeping the beam wildly around the kitchen, cabinets, countertop, sink, fridge, pantry. Nothing. But then something tapped the flashlight. A gentle, almost playful touch. Daniel gasped and stumbled back. The beam flickered again, glitching like a dying bulb. Something moved just outside its reach, too fast to see clearly, like the darkness bending around a shape. The flashlight steadied, and Daniel froze. The girl stood at the end of the hallway, facing him, motionless, her black void eyes gleaming faintly, reflecting nothing, swallowing everything. Her expression was perfectly still, blank, empty, unhuman. Behind her, the boy appeared. One step, another. Their movements were precise, synchronized, unnatural. Their feet made no sound. Daniel tried to speak, but fear had paralyzed his tongue. His hand shook so violently the beam wavered across their faces, but it didn't disturb them. They didn't flinch, didn't blink. The girl tilted her head. We're so very cold. The boy added, his voice layered as if several voices spoke through him. Please, let us in. Daniel finally found his voice, cracking and breathless. You're already inside. The girl took a single step forward. No, she said softly. She smiled again. Wider this time. Too wide. Skin stretching like it didn't want to move that way. You invited us the moment you looked us in the eyes. The flashlight died. Something touched Daniel's arm, and the entire house exhaled. The moment the flashlight died, the darkness felt like it closed its hand around him. Heavy, intentional, alive. Daniel staggered backward until his hip hit the kitchen counter. His finger scrambled along the edge, knocking over a mug that shattered on the floor, its broken pieces somehow impossibly loud in the suffocating black. He didn't dare breathe. Not deeply, not loudly, because the dark was breathing for him now. A slow inhale. A whispered exhale. Not his. Something moved beside him, close enough that a faint shift of air brushed his skin. Daniel flinched violently, stepping sideways, trying to put distance between himself and whatever occupied the shadows. But the shadows moved with him. Then something cold and small slipped its hand into his hand. Daniel nearly screamed. He pulled back instinctively, but the grip tightened. Not painfully. No, it was gentle, disturbingly gentle, like a child trying to reassure him. But the hand was wrong. Too cold, too smooth, like plastic warmed only by the shadows around it. A soft voice rose inches from his ear. You don't have to be afraid. It was the girl. He felt her breath, or the imitation of it, on his skin. It carried no warmth. We only need inside, she whispered. There are others outside. They're watching. They want in too. Daniel's voice cracked. You're already inside. The boy's voice came from his other side. No, we're not in you yet. Daniel's stomach lurched violently. He jerked away, slamming into the pantry door hard enough to rattle it. His hand shot behind him, searching blindly for the knob. He found it and ripped it open, stumbling into the small space, slamming the door shut behind him and turning the lock with trembling fingers. The pantry was pitch black, but at least it felt like his darkness, familiar, still, for exactly 3 seconds. Then, a thin shadow slid under the door. Then another. Then 2 more.
They writhed against the floor like slick tendrils of ink spreading across the tile and seeping toward him. Daniel felt cold creeping up his ankles before he even realized the shadows had reached him. Something scratched the door. Not like nightfall. Not like nightfall. Not like fingernails. Like something tapping in sequence. Tap, 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 tap. Almost like a child knocking a rhythm to a nursery rhyme. Daniel's breathing grew too fast, too loud. He cupped both hands over his mouth, trying to quiet himself, but panic clawed at his ribs. The tapping paused, then the girl spoke from the other side of the door. Her tone as polite and empty as ever. "Daniel, let us in. We can't come further without permission." His pulse hammered against the inside of his skull. He didn't understand. They were already inside the house. They were touching him, whispering to him. How could they need permission? The boy answered as if reading his thoughts. "We need the final invitation." Daniel's voice shook uncontrollably. "What does that mean?" Silence. Then slowly their voices blended. The girl's soft calm, the boy's eerie monotone, two children whispering the same words in perfect unison. "You have to ask us to stay." Daniel nearly retched from fear. He pressed his back against the shelves as something new scratched at the door, lower down this time, softer, too soft to be fingers. "Please," the girl whispered. "Invite us." "Please," echoed the boy. "We're so cold." Their tone never rose, never shifted, never changed. Too calm, too patient, too determined. Daniel shook his head violently, whispering, "No, no, no." Then, the doorknob began to turn. Slow, deliberate, metal groaning under pressure. Daniel slapped both palms onto the knob, holding it down, forcing it to stay locked. The turning stopped. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then the girl said, "We can wait." The boy added, "We always wait." Something pressed its face to the other side of the door, wood bending inward as if soft as wax. Daniel saw a faint outline, small forehead, thin nose, lips curved into a smile. "You'll invite us soon," the girl murmured. "You won't have a choice." And then, the bending stopped. The shadows retracted. Their presence faded down the hall. But Daniel didn't relax, because from outside, through the kitchen window, the motion sensor suddenly clicked on. Bright white light flooded the backyard. Daniel turned his head, slowly, toward the window, and froze. At least 10 more children now stood in his yard, all of them watching the house, all of them expressionless, still, black-eyed, and all of them smiling.
Daniel had never believed in true silence. Even in the quietest nights, there were always the little background sounds, crickets, distant traffic, the hum of appliances. But now, as he pressed his back against the pantry shelves, it hit him like a physical force. There was nothing outside. No insects, no wind, no distant dogs. The world felt muted, suppressing itself, as if holding its breath for what came next. Daniel swallowed hard, knowing he couldn't stay cramped inside the pantry forever. He pressed his ear to the door, carefully, lightly, listening. No footsteps, no tapping, no whispers, only that impossible silence. He slowly unlocked the door. The hinges creaked, and for a second Daniel expected the children to be standing inches away, waiting for him. But the hallway beyond was empty, washed in faint blue moonlight leaking from the windows. He took a step out, then another. His muscles trembled, adrenaline pumping so hard he could barely keep his legs steady. The house felt wrong, the air too still, the shadows too heavy. He forced himself toward the kitchen window, dread tightening around him like barbed wire. When he reached it, he lifted 2 fingers to pull the curtain aside, but the curtain moved on its own. It swayed gently, like someone outside had brushed it or breathed against it. Daniel froze. waited. Then slowly pulled the fabric back. His breath hitched in his throat. They were still there. All of them. A small crowd of pale, black-eyed children standing in absolute stillness, scattered across the lawn. Some right at the glass, others at the fence, some clustered near the shed. But all of them were looking straight at him. Not blinking, not breathing. Just watching. One girl, tall, lanky, her hair hanging wet and stringy, stood closest to the window, so close her forehead nearly touched the glass. Her eyes were two perfect pits of darkness. Her face reflected no light at all. Daniel stumbled back from the window, pulse thundering. His mouth felt dry, his throat constricted. He wanted to scream, wanted to run, wanted to vanish, but all he could do was stare as more children slowly stepped forward from the shadows of the yard. They were surrounding the house now, encircling it, trapping him. A sudden slam hit the front door. Daniel jumped so violently he almost fell. Then another. Then another. Bam! 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 But when he ran to the front hall and peered through the peephole, there was nothing there. Another slam, this time from the back door. He spun around. Then the garage door rattled. Then the side door. Then the windows. All at once. All perfectly timed. A coordinated, circular assault around the house. Not trying to break in, not trying to force anything. Just reminding him. We're everywhere. His phone vibrated again. He flinched and grabbed it desperately. Unknown number. Again. With shaking hands, he answered. He didn't say a word, didn't breathe, just held it to his ear. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, a small voice whispered, "Let us inside." Daniel's hands trembled. Another voice whispered over it, then another, layering, stacking, a chorus of children. "Let us inside, let us inside, let us inside." He threw the phone across the hall. It hit the wall and shattered, batteries skittering across the floor. The voices didn't stop. They seeped from the broken phone like trapped air escaping a cracked pipe. "We are cold. We are hungry. We can't come in unless you invite us." Daniel clamped his hands over his ears, squeezing his eyes shut, but the whispers wormed through his fingers, through his skull, curling like vines through his thoughts. Then, the house shook. Just once. A single heavy impact from somewhere above. Daniel looked up. From the attic. Another impact. Then slow, deliberate crawling. Something was moving in his attic crawl space. Something with small feet. Many small feet. Scuttling, scraping, dragging. Daniel's skin went ice cold. He whispered, "God, they're already inside the walls." Then, the attic door in the hallway creaked. A little. Just enough for him to see the underside of the wooden panel shift. Something pushed against it. Not hard, not trying to break through, just testing, poking, probing. Then, a child's voice drifted down the attic ladder opening. "Daniel." His entire body go rigid. "Please let us inside." He shook his head violently, whispering, "No, no, leave me alone." Silence. Then, the children outside began tapping. All of them. In unison. A perfect, synchronized rhythm. Not random, not frantic. Controlled. Measured. Calculating. A signal. A warning. A countdown.
Daniel backed away from the attic entrance, horror coiling inside him like a living thing. Then, from the attic darkness, a single pale hand slipped through the gap in the door. Small, delicate, childlike, and pitch black from the wrist upward. Another hand followed. Then a whisper. "Invite us, or we'll take it from you." The attic door shuddered as the small, blackened hands pressed harder against it, not with force, but with intent, as though they were testing the strength of the wood, or the strength of what held reality together around it. Daniel staggered backward, his breath locked in his throat as the whisper drifted down again. Soft, almost compassionate, but laced with something ancient and hungry. The tiny fingers curled, and as they did, the wooden panel of the attic hatch began to warp inward. Not break, not splinter, warp, bending in a way wood shouldn't bend, dipping like warmed plastic under invisible heat. The edges of the hatch rippled like the surface of disturbed water, and Daniel realized with rising terror that the children weren't trying to break the door. They were trying to break through it, through the space behind it, through whatever thin barrier separated them from him. A low hum filled the house, vibrating through the floorboards, rattling the glass in the picture frames. Daniel clapped his hands over his ears, but the sound wasn't entering through his head. It was radiating from the walls, the ceiling, the air itself. Light in the hallway flickered as the shadows on the walls stretched longer and sharper, as though forming shapes that didn't belong to anything in the house. The hum rose into a dissonant tone, and the attic door bulged outward as though something larger, much larger, were pressing from the other side. The hands withdrew into the darkness, leaving only the whispering chorus of children behind, their voices overlapping until they formed a single resonating plea. "Invite us, invite us, invite us." Then the ceiling began to crack, not from structural strain, but from something pushing through the fabric of it. Hairline fractures spreading in thin glowing lines, as if reality itself was a slab of porcelain beginning to break apart. Daniel stumbled back into the living room, eyes wide, heart pounding so violently he thought it might burst. The cracks spidered across the ceiling, pulsing with a faint, sickly luminescence, and from the glowing fissures, shapes began to emerge. First the outlines of small heads, then shoulders, then entire bodies pressing through as if they were stepping out of a too bright photograph. Their skin was unnaturally smooth, luminescent at the edges, as though they had been carved from the very light that leaked through the cracks. Their eyes were bottomless voids, drinking in all brightness around them. One of them tilted its head toward Daniel, its mouth unmoving as its voice filled the room, inside the walls, inside the air, inside him. "We don't need doors anymore, Daniel." Another stepped fully out of the fractured ceiling, its form flickering like a bad signal on a dying TV. "You made this easier. You listened." Daniel backed into the far wall, choking on terror, watching as more children slipped through the glowing cracks, their shapes stabilizing as they touched the house's interior air. Every surface began to distort, the walls bowing inward, the floor trembling under an unseen force, the shadows deepening into unnatural pits that threatened to swallow him whole. The children moved in silent, synchronized steps, their eyes locked on him, their presence bending the edges of the room like heat waves. Daniel whispered hoarsely, "What do you want from me?" The children paused. A smaller one stepped forward, voice soft as snowfall. "We want what you won't give." The hum grew louder, shaking dust from the rafters. The glowing cracks reached down the walls like radiant vines. Daniel squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for something, anything, but the whisper pressed against his ear again, closer this time, too close. "So we'll take it." The hum inside the house deepened until it felt like a living creature breathing against Daniel's skin. The fractures in the ceiling spread outward like veins of light, pulsing with a sickly glow that made the air shimmer. The children drifted closer, never walking, never stepping, just gliding, their feet barely touching the floor. The temperature dropped so sharply that frost formed on the picture frames along the hallway, curling its crystalline fingers across the glass as though claiming the house piece by piece. Daniel pressed himself deeper into the corner, his hands flat on the wall behind him as if he could push his way through it, escape through solid wood if he tried hard enough. But the children were no longer watching the doors or the windows. "You don't need to run," one of the children whispered, its voice soft, melodic, and horribly wrong. Another child, barely visible beneath the glow of the fractures, stepped closer, its black eyes reflecting nothing. Not Daniel, not the room, not the world. "We take." A shimmering ripple passed across the living room floor, like a heat mirage, distorting the hardwood until Daniel's reflection stared back at him in warped, stretched fragments. His reflection's mouth moved a split second before he realized his own lips hadn't. Another ripple. The children were pulling at something, not his body, but something deeper, something they had been circling around since the moment they arrived. He felt a cold tug beneath his sternum, a subtle and but unmistakable pull inward, as if invisible threads had hooked into him and were tightening. He gasped as the sensation grew, an icy pressure in the center of his chest, radiating outward through his ribs like frost creeping across glass. "Stop," he wheezed, clutching at his chest as though he could hold himself together. The smallest child tilted its head, observing him with clinical detachment. "This part doesn't hurt," it whispered. "Not yet." The cracks in the walls brightened, spilling more of that unnatural glow until the room looked submerged underwater. The shadows stretched toward Daniel, strands of darkness lifting from the floor like searching tendrils. One of them brushed his shoe, and his entire leg seized with numbness. He tried to pull away, but his muscles refused to listen. The children's eyes widened, not with emotion, but with intent, as though now they could finally reach what they had been waiting for. The pull in his chest intensified. He felt himself leaning forward, though he wasn't moving his feet. Something inside him was being drawn outward, pulled toward the children like iron filings to a magnet. His vision blurred, darkening at the edges. His heartbeat slowed, then throbbed in uneven, jarring pulses. "Let go," one of the children whispered, drifting close enough that Daniel could feel its cold breath on his cheek. Daniel's voice cracked. "Part of me?" The children nodded in perfect unison, the part that opened the first door. Suddenly Daniel's ears rang with memory, the night he first saw the kids, the moment he hesitated, the moment he listened, the moment he feared them. The children fed on fear, but not in the metaphorical way that ghost stories described. No, they harvested it like a resource, peeled it from the human soul, and consumed it. His chest burned. The glow in the walls surged brighter, and something invisible tore loose inside him. He screamed, not from pain, but from the sensation of being hollowed, emptied, unspooled. The children's eyes brightened as a faint shimmer rose from his chest, a ghost-like vapor drawn into the air. It drifted toward them, pulled by an unseen current. The children reached out with pale hands, and the shiver of light hovered between them like a delicate, pulsing ember. Daniel collapsed to his knees, gasping, clutching at his chest where the coldness lingered. He wasn't dead, but something essential, something warm, something human had been stolen. The children observed the faint light they had extracted and then turned their pitch-black eyes back to him. "We're not done." Daniel's breath came in shallow, trembling gulps as he knelt on the floor, the cold burn in his chest spreading like frost beneath his skin. The children watched him silently, their faces still as stone, the faint glow from the fractured walls shimmering across their pale forms. The house itself felt as though it were sinking into some unseen depth, its corners bending, its door frames narrowing, the entire structure warping, as if reality were softening around the children's presence. The glow in the cracks darkened, shifting from sickly white to a deep, molten orange, pulsing like the slow beat of a monstrous heart. One of the children stepped forward, taller than the others, with a face that seemed less childlike and more sculpted, smooth and emotionless. It lifted a hand, palm outward, and the air in front of Daniel vibrated. He felt pressure against his skull, a gentle push, like a cold hand resting on his forehead. His vision doubled, the room flickered, and for a moment, only a moment, he saw the house, not as it was, but as the children saw it, a shell of cracked light floating in a void, its walls barely holding back a swirling darkness that pressed to get inside. The child lowered its hand, and the vision vanished. Daniel collapsed fully to the floor,
trembling so hard he thought his bones might shatter. "Why? What do you want from me?" "You're still holding on," the taller child replied, its voice soft yet hollow like wind drifting through an empty bottle. "There is more to take." Daniel shook his head weakly. "There's nothing left." A small smile appeared on the child's lips, not warm, not kind, but curious. "Humans always think that, until the very end." More children drifted closer, forming a semicircle around him. Their eyes glistened with that impossible, depthless black, reflecting nothing, not the light, not him, not the room. They lifted their hands, fingers outstretched, and the fractures in the walls widened, spilling red-orange glow across the living room floor. The shadows responded first, stretching toward Daniel like liquid darkness, curling around his hands, his legs, his throat. Daniel clawed at the carpet, pushing himself backwards, even though he knew there was nowhere left to go. His voice broke into a ragged whisper. "Please, please don't." The children paused, their heads tilted in unison, listening to something he couldn't hear, some silent command echoing through whatever veil they had pierced. Then the tall one stepped closer and lowered itself until its face hovered inches from Daniel. "You invited fear. Fear is the key. Fear is the door. And every door leads somewhere." Daniel's heart stopped for a beat, then another. He felt the world tilt under him. The child lifted its hand once more, fingers hovering over the center of his chest. This time, Daniel felt the pull instantly, violent, devouring. It tore through him like a rip in the fabric of his soul, dragging something deeper, something still alive and thrashing, something he didn't know he had left. He screamed, a raw, guttural sound that ripped through the house as the children reached toward the shimmering shape rising from his chest. It wasn't faint this time. It wasn't small. It was a blazing core of light, pulsing frantically, struggling against the invisible pull. Daniel collapsed onto the floor. He could barely breathe, barely see. The tallest child reached for the light and paused. For the first time, its expression changed. Its head turned slightly as if sensing something behind Daniel. The others followed, eyes shifting toward the shattered front window. Beyond it, darkness, movement. Dozens more figures approaching, maybe hundreds. The tall child whispered, "They arrived early." Daniel tried to lift his head, but he couldn't. His body felt hollow, weightless, fading. The children didn't take the glowing core of Daniel's soul. They let it flicker above him, trembling like a dying star. Then, without a word, they stepped back into the glowing cracks. One by one, they dissolved through the fractures, slipping between the folds of reality like fish disappearing into dark water. The glow dimmed, the cracks sealed. The house shuddered, groaning with relief. And then, silence. Daniel lay motionless on the floor, barely conscious. He stared at the ceiling through blurred eyes, the numbness in his body spreading inward, dimming him, hollowing him. The children were gone, but their whisper lingered in his fading mind. "We'll finish what we started when the others arrive." Darkness swallowed his vision before he could understand what they meant. If you ever find yourself on a lonely Texas road at night, don't stop when you see small figures by the trees. Don't listen when they ask for help. Don't look into their empty black eyes, because those aren't children, not anymore. They are the first wave, the scouts at the door of reality. And every time someone hesitates, every time someone listens, every time someone fears them, they take a little more. Tonight, Daniel survived. But the black-eyed children are patient, and Texas is a wide, dark land, perfect for harvesting what they came for. Because once they mark a soul, they always come back for the rest.